We're back with the author of Team of Vipers, My 500 Extraordinary Days in the Trump White House. Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
I want to read a portion that you wrote about this. He said that, this is a quote of Stephen Miller's, who gives the president, obviously, lots of foreign policy advice, including all of the immigration policy. Stephen Miller says, quote, "I would be happy if not a single refugee foot ever touched American soil," end quote. Miller said this dismissively. I didn't press the issue with him. There was no use. How much does President Trump agree with that?
I don't know. And I'll say, too, that that statement I don't think was necessarily indicative of the policy that he's trying to implement. I don't think he thinks that's a realistic policy. But I included it because I think it gets at a little deeper kind of feeling about the refugee issue that is pervasive among some people in the White House. And it hit me in a personal way because I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East working with Syrian refugees. And so when we talk about that issue, I see those faces.
So more than Stephen Miller feels that way in the White House?
I think probably so. I think from a policy perspective, the administration's stated goals on the refugee issue, which are to move these people to safe places as close to their homes as possible, to prioritize religiously persecuted individuals. I think those are good things. My point in talking to him about that was the president promised to take care of Christian refugees in that part of the world, and I just really wanted to keep that promise.
Did you ever hear President Trump say anything about refugees?
No, nothing specific that I can remember. I do vaguely remember there was a policy debate at one point about the number of refugees that we were going to take in. The State Department was very involved in that. I remember brief conversations about that, but nothing that really sticks out.
Who wrote the anonymous op-ed?
Man, wouldn't we all like to know? Wouldn't we all like to know?
Who's your theory?
I don't know. I kind of feel like it's probably some deputy secretary of blah, blah, blah at an agency. But I'll say I didn't like that. And in my book, I'm willing to be critical of various people and the president and different things. I just didn't think there was anything honorable in writing, like basically being the resistance inside. Because as a staffer, you have two options. You disagree with the president and you subordinate your views to him when he makes a decision, you go with it, or you quit. And either one of those can be honorable. I just don't like the whole resistance on the inside thing.
Have you talked to the president since you left the White House?
I have briefly at one point when I left, but nothing substantive. Haven't talked to him since the news about the book came out.
Here's what, according to Politico, the president is feeling about your book. Trump is asking aides, who is this guy? Why is he writing this book? He wasn't even in meetings. This is what the sources told Politico.
Yeah. Oh, people read it for themselves and see all the vivid scenes.
But I mean, were you in meetings and he does know you?
Sure. You know, one of my favorite things we have is a document of about 45 different pictures of like foreign leader meetings and budget meetings and you name it, and there I am in the background. So it's kind of hard to write the pictures out of history, but it doesn't surprise me. It's kind of par for the course.
Did you sign an NDA, a non-disclosure?
Yeah. The truth is, I kind of don't remember.
That seems important.
Well, I assume that I signed whatever Sean Spicer signed in the White House. I assume I signed whatever Corey Lewandowski and Dave Bossie signed on the campaign. Those folks have written books, but I just really don't remember.
Wow. But somebody
you know how it is when you have a lot of onboarding paperwork and you're just going to town. So I remember signing some paperwork. I don't remember what it was.
The president likes to give tours of the White House. Can you tell us what he says on those tours, including he gives a tour of where he says the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal happened?
Yeah, so the kind of suite that's off of the Oval Office, he's got a beautiful white marble bathroom there. I mean, he's still a construction guy. He likes to point, you know, out the quality of some of these things. There's the private study where you mentioned various nefarious events may have taken place. You know, there's the private dining room, which he says was a dump when he got there, and he spruced it up. He got a new chandelier in there, which we paid for with his own money. He likes to take people up. I remember the whole New England Patriots football team goes up to the residence to see the Lincoln bedroom, and he loves to show the Emancipation Proclamation there and all these different things. So he's just kind of like a gregarious host, loves to take people, you know, kind of explore the wonder of the White House. And the whole atmosphere is kind of like, can you believe it? Here we are. Yeah. So it's pretty funny.
So now he thinks the White House is up to snuff, but he thought it was a dump before he took over.
I'll actually defend him on that one a little bit. People thought he was talking about the residents, and he wasn't. The West Wing, in all fairness, was a dump when we got there because it had been 8 years since it had been renovated in the most highly trafficked worst space in the country. So it was kind of dumpy. It wasn't anybody's fault. So he did enjoy sprucing the place up.
So, Cliff, now that the book comes out today, why did you want to write it? Why did you want to reveal all of this stuff about what goes on inside?
Well, what I noticed was every book that's been written about the place has either been, let's burn the place down, set it on fire, or let's be sycophantic and it's the greatest thing that ever happened. And what I thought was missing was a firsthand account of the truth about what it's like to work there by somebody who's willing to put their name on it. And so that's really why I wanted to write this book.
And I assume you're burning bridges. I mean, for instance, you say unkind things about Kellyanne Conway that have gotten a lot of press. And so you're willing to burn some bridges on your way out.
Well, I didn't really look at it that way. I wouldn't like going out of my way to burn anybody down, but I did want to just give a really accurate picture. And for some people, that's not a beautiful portrait all the time, including of myself. I mean, I would argue that I'm more critical of myself in this book than of anybody else.
I mean, you talk about the leakers in there, but obviously the president must be comfortable with it because people still are there. There are many people who are still there.
I don't think he's comfortable with it. I think he's perplexed by it. And actually, the impetus for the whole meeting about the enemies list was him trying to make sense of reading stories in which people who are his own staff are saying bad things.
And so how does that work?
Him.
He called you in and he said, let's sit down and you tell me who's against me. What did he say? Exactly?
Yeah, he was looking for someone he felt like he could trust to tell him like who's who and what's what, like who are these people. And essentially the case I made for him was the people that abandoned you during the campaign when it was the toughest times, a lot of those people are here now. And it's going to be tough in here too, and I feel like they're abandoning you again. As I mentioned earlier, though, it's one of the moments in the White House that I regret doing that. But in the moment, I was so caught up in, you know, I was a Viper too. We're talking about the team of Vipers. I feel like I was as well playing the game. You know, I'm going to push somebody else out so I can get a better position or whatever it may be. So it was a bizarre kind of series of events there.
Now that you're on the outside, was it interesting for you, or what did you glean from watching the whole shutdown experience where the president did not win? And so what does that tell you? What can you tell us about his negotiating style of why he didn't win that?
Totally. So there's a scene in the book where he's frustrated with Paul Ryan, and he's on the phone with him. One of the things he said that stuck out to me was, look at Nancy Pelosi. She knows a little word called loyalty, Paul. And the point he was making was she keeps her people together, and she's tough. And I think there's probably a reason why Nancy Pelosi hadn't got a nickname yet. And I think he respects her as a negotiator. I will say the shutdown was a little bit out of character for Trump because I noticed in his negotiating style, he's always looking for ways to increase his leverage, look for ways to invent leverage if he can. And he seemed to be negotiating right out of the gate from a position of weakness because, you know, we used to have Republican control of both houses. Now a Democrat Democrats are in control of the House. So he was negotiating from a much worse place, I feel like, than if he'd have had this fight earlier in the presidency.
Well, sure. I mean, when the Republicans controlled both houses, that's been a big question of why did he make these demands now?
Yeah,
only when Nancy Pelosi was there, that seemed like a misfire.
I think for the first 2 years, a lot of people that were around him were constantly making the case to like, we'll have this fight later, we'll have this fight later. He woke up and realized one day, the wall is the one policy position that is so inextricably linked to Donald Trump that you ask an 8-year-old on the street, what's Donald Trump about, they'll say the wall. If he doesn't get that, he's going to have a hard time in 2020.
Since you were involved in messaging, how much of his messaging comes from Fox News?
I do think that there's a pretty big feedback loop there. I don't think that that surprises anyone. He does pay close attention. I think it can be a positive in that he has his finger on the pulse of what his base thinks and what the country is thinking.
Well, what his base thinks and what Fox News' audience thinks. I don't know if it's what the country thinks.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that the whole political strategy for Trump has been a base play from day one, that he bet that energizing a base of people is going to be more effective than appealing to kind of a mile wide and an inch deep. So he's going to go super deep with 35 to 40% of the country and bet they're the ones who turn out on Election Day.
Was it helpful that he speaks to Sean Hannity and watches Fox so much during the day?
I think it's overblown a little bit. I mean, the guy's working. I mean, people say a lot of things about him. One thing you can't deny, he's a workhorse. I saw it firsthand. But I do think that there are times that, you know, maybe it'd be better to get policy advice from an expert in that field than it is from any TV host, regardless of network.
You'll be shocked to know that the president just tweeted about you while we've been doing this interview.
Really?
Yes. I'll read it to you right now.
Okay,
and
good.
to myself.
Good.
A low-level staffer that I hardly knew, named Cliff Sims, wrote yet another boring book based on made-up stories and fiction. He pretended to be an insider when, in fact, he was nothing more than a gopher.
Nice.
He signed a non-disclosure agreement. He is a mess.
There it is. Look, I knew that was a possibility when I wrote this book, and you know what I said? My identity is not wrapped up in being a Trump staffer. My identity is wrapped up in, who I am in my faith, and those are things that matter to me. I know who Jesus says I am. Don't matter to me what Donald Trump or anyone else says that I am.
You don't mind being called a gopher?
Doesn't matter to me one bit.